Hi.
Hello, hello,
Welcome.
everybody.
My apologies. I can't work out daylight savings time, apparently.
No problem, no problem.
Welcome,
Uh,
welcome.
Welcome.
Mm. Good morning.
Good morning to everybody out there. Coming off of a big couple of weeks of trials, I'll tell you that much.
Oh,
A lot,
yep.
a lot
It
has
was a
happened.
hamburger lot, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. It was. A lot of trials that we've had since we talked last, Jody. And the Farris case is in the bag. I don't know if you saw that. That's obviously the
Hmm.
topic of today's trial because
Absolutely.
the jury has rendered a verdict after a very long deliberation. One that I don't necessarily agree with, but
No.
you know, um, I understand it to a degree. But I think the jury got it wrong. What do you think, Jody? Did you closely follow that case?
Not as closely as you. I did watch probably two-thirds of it. I don't think if she was involved, I don't think she did it on her own. I don't think she could have. But there was way too much doubt there for me for a conviction, in my opinion. I thought, no, way too much doubt. But you get that, apparently.
I think that like I said, I think that it was a case where the jury felt she was involved to some level, and clearly, from listening to the juror talk about deliberations, it didn't matter
Yeah,
to her
no,
how it was.
no, all where.
It was just she's involved. They weren't going to convict her, and it matters not that somebody else might have been involved. Because I wonder, I wish the court TV would have let her know, hey, would it have made a difference? How do you feel today knowing Scott failed a polygraph test?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and failed it badly, which I think is significant. I think,
Do,
again, that's huge because that
do you know
means
of any other pretrial stuff that wasn't allowed in?
I don't. That's the one. That's the
No.
only thing I'm aware of.
Yeah,
Like I said, it's not a case that when I went back and was looking through, there wasn't a whole bunch of reporting.
no,
It was a case that I think kind of took off during trial as people started learning about it, and it was broadcasting on Law and Crime and Court TV.
yeah.
Um,
And then at the very end, we had the MJ
well, the
that pretty much
MJ
sealed
again, that
the
should
deal, didn't it?
never. Well, that didn't help because
No.
it filled in a gap, right?
Hmm.
If you look at the way the case would have been at the very at the very beginning when they came in. Again, remember there was a lot of gaps filled in during the trial, which was kind of unprecedented, especially when you listen to the defense attorneys talk afterwards.
Yeah.
And there was cell phone evidence that was sprung on them in the last minute. This MJ stuff comes in, but the real problem with MJ's testimony is she was tainted. Now the judge said that was rectified, and any prejudice was rectified
Oh,
by.
because she'd seen it on social media.
Well, yes, but normally that would exclude the testimony because if she was called, the defense made a big mistake. They should have subpoenaed her and locked her down, but
Yeah.
evidently they didn't see her as being a threat of any sort. But then, of course, their approach was okay. The defense says, well, she technically wasn't subject to the
Yeah.
the sequestration order. So as a result, I'm not. If she was, it's a no-brainer. She gets excluded.
Yep.
Now you get to open that up on cross examination. If the state still wants to call her, you get to cross examine her on it. You get to bring up the fact that she was, influenced by social media and YouTube. And essentially, you heard the defense attorneys very passionately argue in closing that she was not credible, and she wasn't, for the sole fact that everything she brought to the table came from the trial because she'd already heard all of that. So I question again. It'll be an interesting. It'll be an interesting. I think issue for the appellate court of Georgia to
You think
say,
there's definitely going to be an appeal?
oh, for certain. Yeah, there
Yeah.
always is an appeal. I mean,
Yeah.
every case is going to go through the appeal process. That's going to be one of the issues, but it's going to really be an issue of whether or not, um, again, whether or not a witness that wasn't under subpoena, but was known, but was one that was put on the witness list, but was never actually subpoenaed for the trial, whether or not sequestration would extend to that witness, and whether or not if that witness who was told she shouldn't have been watching the trial and did so anyways, should the judge have excluded her testimony, or was it proper to just say she's going to have to submit to cross-examination on this topic? I'm going to give the defense wide leeway on it. They're going to be able to get into all of it. And, you know,
So do you think that the judge was more biased to the state?
no, not at all. I thought the judge was. I thought the judge was biased to really nobody. I mean, he was just a guy. I think that was like, to him, he was going to let it all fly. He believed, which could be good, could be bad, but I think he was just kind of a judge that it was like, I'm gonna be wide open. So I'm gonna let it all come in. But I'm going to let the defense do a lot of. You're going to get wide latitude. I mean, he wasn't now. Even the judge himself said during the trial that he was surprised by the lack of objections going on. But the judge,
and the defense asking questions on cross-examination, just letting the witnesses raffle on and giving the state evidence against.
Well, I think these attorneys felt like it was helping their case. Like, for instance, I think that what they were trying to do was let the witness go on, and in hopes that they would say something. In hopes that they would say something that would hang themselves and that they could jump on. He definitely. I agree with that, Teresa Lemaster. He definitely was not the most professional judge, because I think if you would have had if you would have had a more professional judge in terms of controlling his courtroom more, this trial should have been done in 2 weeks. I mean, and I was surprised by the amount of stuff that came in on the video or came in on the audio recordings, because there is a provision in the law that says that the state is not allowed to just put the same thing in over and over again. So one of the things the defense can raise is, all right, they've heard this, they've heard that. You can't just keep playing the same stuff over and over again, unless, again, you're playing something for the purpose of maybe it's not consistent, or it's this, or it's that. But if there's just a topic or a theme that is the same, they get to hear it one time. The investigator would say, yeah, that was consistent throughout, but they don't need to play hours and hours to say, okay, she said there was an affair. She said there was an affair. Now, if there is a portion that she said there was an affair this time and she said there wasn't an affair next time, they can play that for the jury.
Yep.
But I think the defense's idea here was like, we want them to get to know Melody. This isn't going to hurt us.
So they played her whole deposition, didn't they?
Well, it wasn't depositions. It was what it was the police statements, and then they had these tapes that were recorded by her lover. I mean, it was a lot of stuff and a lot of statements to the police. And again, I think that if you take away one thing in this, watching it, it's one that's just consistent across the board, is you don't talk to the police ever. Not in America. I mean, you heard it yet again. We hear it in all these cases. Listen, once they give you your Miranda rights and you waive your rights, it's not just a matter of, okay, they can use your statements. They can lie to you. They can mislead you. And a lot of people will turn to the police and say, hey, I want to know what's going on. I want to know what's happening with my case. So they'll turn around and go, okay, hey, Mr. Police Officer, you tell me what's going on. And the idea here is guilty people will want to know because they can't stand it. So it's like, that's why they consider it fair game. But now you're sitting there and you're like, okay, Mr. Police Officer, tell me what you have. I'll tell you in a minute, but we got to get, this out of you, and you got to answer these questions. And the problem is whatever they're going to tell you they have, you don't know if it's real. Yeah. So your best deal is get a lawyer. And when they talk to the attorney, they can't lie to the attorney. So that's another reason why
it just happens over and over and over again.
Well,
and these people think they're smarter than
it's not even that. I think it's partly that, but it's more that people really, if you listen to people talk in general, if you're at the backyard barbecue in America and you listen to people talk, they always say, well, if I'm not guilty, what do I have to hide? Like, why would I not talk to the police? I want to go down to the police because they're going to tell me. They don't understand that the police can lie to them. They don't understand that, in in America, once the Miranda is read to you, it opens up this whole thing, and you have an investigator in front of you who has taken hours and hours of courses designed to get you to say something incriminating about yourself. And the thing is, a lot of these techniques that they're taught have problems in them that they don't necessarily get guilty. They can get an innocent person to incriminate themselves. Yeah. So it's very problematic when all you have is a confession, but that's all they need. Once they get you to say something incriminating or go on the records, that's why it's very important that you get an attorney and you let the attorney do their work and you don't talk to the police. Mm-hmm. Even if you're completely 100% innocent, let the attorney handle the business. And if you're going to give a statement, it's given through the attorney, whatever the attorney is going to authorize. And
really, there was no real evidence as such that tied her to the gun,
nothing
that tied her to the bullet, that tied to an actual visual crime scene of sort.
Well, the only reason why they ended up charging her originally, was because of the Rusty statement, where Rusty told the police that she said he's on the burn pile. And then they had her on tape, not clearly saying that didn't happen, which is the portion the jury asked to be played back. It's all that the jury was left with. And in a 1-month trial, which is the danger of having a 1-month trial, that's all the jury was worried about.
Even though he recanted it.
Well, even though he recanted it, but it was like, one thing that I think is underappreciated. When I served on a jury, it was one day, right? And going back in that jury room and trying to remember and recount what the testimony was, there are some states that do not even allow you to take notes. Because when you're as a juror, what you have to understand is it's an exception to hearsay as well, but they want your present sense impression of everything going on in the courtroom, of the witness. So they want you to just go, okay, this is my impression of this witness. And this is what, and this is my takeaway. So when I'm judging that witness's credibility, it's based on how I felt in this moment right now.
And you struggle to remember one day's testimony.
Well, the other thing is they don't want, one reason why jurisdictions outlaw notes, although this one did not, I don't believe, is because when you start writing notes, you start to make a commitment. You're doing a self-deliberation. And that's one of the reasons why they say we don't want you to deliberate. We don't want you to think about the case. We don't want you to formulate an opinion about the case, because the moment you formulate any type of assumption or opinion, you're going to begin looking at all the evidence after that to either say this is correct or this is wrong. And you don't want to begin looking at this case until you've heard the entire case. Because if you start to get tunnel vision and you determine early on, you know what, I think she probably rolled him down to the burn pile. All you're looking for is evidence that she rolled him down to the burn pile, and you might miss the evidence that says the burn pile couldn't have started till 1 p.m. because at that point you're just like zoning out unless you're hearing evidence that meets your conclusion.
Well,
it's called tunnel
within
vision.
The first hour of the investigation, who was leading and narrating the story?
Correct.
From the very beginning.
Scott. Right. And that's why, you want to look at this whole picture. So
and that's the line they followed.
Well, that's the line they were given. And then, of course, the jury was not given the benefit of knowing that he had failed to pass a polygraph test. And that's huge. So I think, Jody, do you have a clip, correct, of the defense attorney?
A clip. It's a 9-minute clip of basically the two defense attorneys being interviewed and asked what they would have wanted to come in and how they think the case actually went. So let me see if I can bring that up properly. I should have. Oh, look at me go. She does it. First go. All right. Let's have a listen. Tell me if you can hear it.
Was there any evidence that you wanted to get in front of this jury that didn't get in front of this jury for whatever reason?
Scott's failed polygraph.
Hang on.
That's huge.
That's huge.
Yeah. Was there any evidence that you wanted to get in front of this jury that didn't get in front of this jury for whatever reason?
Scott's failed polygraph.
That's huge.
That's huge.
Yeah, but that never comes in.
That never comes in.
Never comes in.
A lot of my cross-examination, though, of Scott was from the polygraph interview.
just to see how he would react, to try to trigger those memories.
I
was walking a very fine line, and I knew that. Jeffrey Fogus, he stood up and he objected fervently to me even getting into it. But it was important. I mean, he failed that polygraph. He ended that interview and he lawyered up. That is critical stuff that never got to be in front of this jury.
But it never is.
I know.
It never is.
I know.
Right. So was there anything else?
Well, we were somewhat. I mean, we obviously weren't trying to, set up some type of mistrial or anything like that. We wouldn't do that.
Right.
But if Scott said something, because if he got an idea going back, thinking about that interview that the GBI did of him, and he slips up and says something, then
door's
I don't
open.
know. He opens the door himself, then we're just going to run right through it.
Right. So what did you think of the testimony of the children? Like, was that how damaging did you feel that was?
I think we felt fine after they testified, after all three of them.
There was a big reaction from folks online.
But the jury, after we talked to the jury, the things they thought that people thought they cared about, they didn't. I mean, so the kind of diagram that the state came up with about the late night phone calls, they didn't care about that.
Nope.
They didn't care about that. They cared about the timeline. They cared about the geofence and some of the phone calls with Rusty, but not even all of them. They said, we didn't care about all that other stuff. So this trial that went on for a month, I mean, if they could have somehow honed in on it, it could have been so much shorter.
Plenty of jury cases, you don't never know what they're thinking. You can look at them and say, I think they're on my side, and they come out and they're not, or they are.
But you can look and see they're tired. And when they're tired, sometimes we could go much further on a witness, but we're not going to do that. We're stopping right here.
Now, talking about, let's get to, I want to go to the fourth soundbite that I have for you, which is about
the juror,
where the murder took place. And here's what the juror had to say about that.
For me personally, it didn't matter whether or not it happened in the house or it happened in the yard. I didn't really care where it happened. I feel like the house showed evidence that something happened in the house. But I personally think that it's not difficult to imagine that she could have moved the body. When we got out to the site, it felt like it was a bit steeper than it looked in the pictures. I know my own personal strength. I know I'm a bigger lady than she is, but I don't have any mental reservations. If I had to move something with everything available, I would have figured out a way to do it.
All right, so and then we're looking right now at the video of where the burn pile is and the slope. And that's one thing she said. The slope was a little steeper than she thought when she went on the jury view to actually see the land. How important, this was a big issue for you guys, right? Because the prosecution's saying he's murdered in the house and then somehow gets to the burn pile. He's over 300 pounds, she's $120, and that's just, the math doesn't work there for moving that dead body.
Correct.
But this juror didn't care, and that's basically what the prosecution argued, right? You can use an ATV, I mean, I had someone online saying, well, maybe they used one of the horses or something. Like, no one knows.
Yeah.
Why don't we know that? Why don't we know that?
Michael, talk about the crime scene.
Yeah, I think it would be because of the crime scene. I mean, essentially when they got there, we were actually talking to Detective Hayes afterwards, and, when he was talking to the jury, he was more of, we just thought we were going to go, that it was an accidental death and all of that, and it wasn't going to be that big of a deal. And there are people trampling through the crime scene. They drove the crime scene truck through the backyard. And then nobody investigated it. They investigated the burn pile inside the house, and then they left it out. Nothing in between the house, nothing in the front, the barn. Things were just completely left because no one was in charge.
Literally, Vinny, they would look like right here on the floor in front of this table, but they wouldn't look out on the table or on the couch. They looked for nothing. Just right there on the floor.
So what did you think the blood was from? Or the luminol.
We had evidence that there was a dog bite, and Amanda testified to that the week before he was bit by Motley.
Yeah, on his ankle.
And that would account for that. Is it possible that, I know you don't believe Melody did it, but whoever did it shot him at the burn pile?
That's what, when we were reading the stuff online, that's what people keep saying, and that makes the most logical sense. Shoot him at the burn pile, he falls in, that makes it simple. Then you get to the issue of, then why is there a bullet in the house? That's where I always come back to. And then you're relying on...
With no blood around the bullet.
No blood around the
We kept
bullet.
pointing to that over and over and over again.
So you've got this bullet in the house, and then it's like, well, Melody still, if she shot him at the burn pile, but then she planted the bullet in the house. That doesn't make any sense. So that's always been, for me, to me personally, that was doubt right there.
Would anybody ever benefit from your father being killed? And I was very frank. I said, well, yeah. I mean, my mom.
They discovered a bullet lodged in a rib bone.
At that point, did you suspect your mom?
Definitely.
I did receive confirmation later that my dad had been shot, and that was pretty much the sticking point for me. When I heard that, I thought, I mean, it just confirmed my beliefs.
So did I assume the worst? Yes, I did. Obviously, I did.
So in your own words, when she said he is in the burn pile, what was your assumption?
That she had something to do with him.
Yeah.
That he was dead and burning?
Because I don't, that he was dead and burning up.
I was saying all along, that's bad in this case.
Well, I mean, for us, from our investigation, the things we figured out along the way, we believed that Scott did it, and then we kind of backed up from there, and we saw that Chris became in concert with Scott. He had a financial motive, a benefit. I mean, he became the head of the estate after his father's death.
And Melody wouldn't get anything?
Exactly.
No, Melody wouldn't get anything under Georgia law, especially if she was convicted.
But if she's not convicted, this goes as an unsolved murder. Who gets the money?
That would have been fought out in probate then.
Okay, so they got to split up. So was there an actual, I mean, it's like a two-step process, though, for Scott or Chris to benefit from any of this, right? I mean, first, you've got to commit murder, get away with it, and then you've got to frame your mother.
True.
And that's what Melody believes happened here.
That is what Melody definitely believes. And part of also what John Luke was saying is, why would they do that? But Scott started doing that the moment law enforcement arrived. I mean, you even heard from the chief of police, Chief Pinion, that he's literally just walking through the crime scene, just trying to check on his deputies, and he's just being fed information about affairs and a missing gun from the house, all within minutes of law enforcement arriving.
And that's, and obviously that's suspicious. Did you talk to the jury about that afterwards? What did they think of that?
They didn't really say anything about that. That I just don't think that it really, the way the jurors explained it is said there was no direct evidence. This is actually from the foreperson. There was no direct evidence, but there was just so much circumstantial evidence.
From day one, from the early minutes of the 911 call, which let's think who made the 911 call. It was that man right there. He was in control from the very first minute of this case, Scott Farris. That would be somehow how your mother pulled off moving a 300-pound man in the house instead of the very obvious solution, which is that the one person on the property who could move him did move him, and that's you. You used that .357 to shoot your father, did you not?
No, because I never shot my father.
Did you throw that .357 into Lake Lanier after you shot your father?
No, because I have not seen that .357 since 2012, I think it was.
Did you shoot him at the barn, Scott?
I never shot my father.
Means, the ability. They started talking about those circles. They started zooming in on one person. And it's not Melody Farris. It's Scott Farris. He's sitting here today. And 20 pounds. I am 185 pounds. And that's all I have.
Yeah, there you go.
There it is, guys. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like I said, that the points that you heard made there, by the defense. I mean, the jury obviously ignored them, didn't care, And it was just a situation where, like I said, I think what overrode that jury was they felt she was involved at some level, and they just didn't care what level it was. To her, it was like she was involved. We're going to just find her. We're going to find
Scott was
her.
never investigated at
No.
all, was it? Like the barn was never searched, nothing.
No.
He was
Well,
never-
again, as was discussed in, that question was posed to the defense attorney and said, well, why do you think they never searched it, or why was there no evidence found? And what they clearly stated was, and of course it came out over the course of the trial, was that initially the police thought this was an accident, an accidental situation. They were confused by Scott Farris's behavior because they were like, why is he telling us all this information? Why is he talking about a gun? Because there'd been no, implication that a bullet was there. So, but the police very incompetently start driving all over this crime scene. They drive they drive the vehicle up there, the coroner vehicle up there. So they destroyed the ability to figure out what happened. And that was one of the big overriding factors in this case, I think, that you had a police force who was trying to cover up their own incompetence. Because, one of the things police don't ever want to have to admit is, oh my God, we went and screwed this crime scene up. And remember, there were questions posed on cross-examination to these officers. Why did you not let the Georgia Bureau of Investigations come in? I think one of the reasons why that was because they realized they had effed this up so bad that they didn't want the Georgia Bureau of Investigation to come in and start looking at this and say, guys, what the heck were you doing? Even if you think it's an accident, until you got that confirmation, you should have secured this crime scene. You should have taken steps to make sure that, this whole thing was searched. Really, you should have just brought in the professionals, because by everyone's own account, from the prosecution to the investigators, deaths don't happen, unalivings don't happen in Cherokee County, Georgia. So these people were not at all experienced in terms of.
What if it could have been a combination of the two? What if it was a crime of opportunity, say, and Gary did have one of his spells, falls into the fire, and Scott thinks, this is a perfect opportunity to frame my mother, bang, bang, takes one of the bullets and puts it inside.
Could have been. But I think one of the troubling things, again, is in this case, which, again, as having watched this month-long trial, I went all over the place on what I thought happened, right? But, the cell phone testimony that came in, okay, that was brought in by the state, basically, changed everything up, as you may have heard the defense attorneys talking about, because all of a sudden now they know that Gary was alive at 9:32 p.m. Now we know he arrived at 9:32 p.m. And what I was surprised about was them continuing to go forward with that alarm technician guy, because I think that hurt them more than what he brought to the table, because what they wanted was for him to say, and at the time you would have never known that it was like for certain when Gary would have passed away, or what was happening, or who was on property or not. But with the cell phone information, the jury knew, and for them, when they're looking at this, again, in the light of trying to remember everything from memory, everything from memory, they're not going to remember all these little nuances or all these little doubts. They're going to remember that, hey, this guy testifies that a gunshot happens between 9 and 10. Then they see that Gary arrives at 9:32 p.m. Then they see that very clearly Scott couldn't have been on property, right, until about 11:30. So now they're like, okay, if somebody's hearing a gunshot, right, and it's between 9 and 10, and we know Gary arrives back at the house at 9:32, and we know that there's only two people on property at the time. For them, it matters not how he got on the burn pile, because if she shot
that time is the correct time.
Hold on 1 second. I apologize.
I don't know if that is the correct time frame. Is that established?
Well, the only
that time?
Yeah, the only thing that wasn't established here, essentially nothing. There was no time frame definitively established. It's all got to be inferred by the evidence. But this guy testifies that there was a gunshot, and this is a defense witness. So it's like when I was saying, the state calls a fire witness that says the fire couldn't have been started till after 1, right? So nobody says the gunshots and the fire have to all start at the same time.
Yeah.
What we know is that, this guy says between 9 and 10 or sometime around 10 o'clock, he hears what he thinks is a gunshot on the 3rd, right? And then you have her be at that time when the jury goes back and looks at the evidence, which is the cell phone evidence, which shouldn't have, again, that'll be another disputed situation because from the defense's perspective, that shouldn't have come in because it was dropped on them in jury selection. So they did not have an opportunity to get their own. Well, listen, as they didn't have an opportunity to get their own experts to come in, vet this, go through it, have proper hearings. But the judge basically just said it's coming in. And then they had their hearing. But to me, what's inexplicable with the state doing that is this is a 6-year case. Why is the prosecution just now analyzing the cell phone data? Like, what's going on here? So that seems like a real sandbagging of, like, we're going to sandbag the defense and drop this on their doorstep at the very latest possible time. And the judge basically said, okay, fine. But it turns out all of that in culmination in a case like this, you have the cell phone stuff, which is absolutely troubling. And then you have and it's troubling because, of course, it's got Melody Farris, or it's got Gary's phone moving around the property on the 4th, but it's got Gary, the last time Gary arrives on property and connects to Wi-Fi is at 9:32 p.m. on the 3rd. You've got no more activity from Gary's phone until the morning, like around 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning. Now, of course, it brings a lot of questions in, too, because without the CPAP data suggesting he didn't sleep that night, it could have also suggested he was alive. But then it also shows that Melody's phone was in close proximity. But without getting a countering expert who will testify that all of that stuff is absolute bunk, and that is true, there's a lot of, in fact, actually, the Innocence Project out there in a couple of states have come back and pushed back on cases based on cell phone evidence alone because it's not exact science.
And someone else could have had the phone and walked with it.
And but it's presented in that way. It's just like fiber evidence and hair evidence is not an exact science, but it's used a lot of times in that way by prosecutors. But it's a concern, obviously, that this comes into the defense without proper time for them to process, and they were just not given enough time because it was dropped on them in jury selection. And on top of that, you're trying to pick a jury, you're trying to prepare for opening statements, and now you've got this new cell phone data that's coming in. That's absolutely turns out to be something that the jury, I think, now by the jury's own admission, they didn't even worry about that. That was not even, to them, it was just a time frame. Although I think they worried about it from the standpoint of knowing that those were the only 2, but they weren't worried about everything that happened the next day. So, I think the defense was just thinking to themselves, hey, the biggest doubt here is how would Melody get that body down? Because again, one of the things now, what I wish they would have really emphasized, like they did with Vinnie Politan, I felt like they really emphasized things clearer with Vinnie Politan than in closings. But one of the things that I thought was a major point to me that really was a good point to highlight, which was the conflict between, all right, everybody that thinks she was shot at the burn pile, then how do you explain the bullet inside? And, you say, well, and then if you say the people that say, well, he was shot inside, well, then how do you explain the lack of physical evidence?
Yeah.
So the question is what happened here? But again, for the jury, they say, all we have to conclude is we think she was shot by him. And the jury's implication here that he was shot was like, their idea was that she was the only one that could have possibly done it. But I don't necessarily agree with that, except for the fact that the defense puts on the only witness that actually shut down the possibility Scott could have done it. So why they called that alarm tech guy, I have no idea. I mean, because I'm not even certain that I believe it was like you want to believe his memory on what he said Scott said, but then you want to have the jury question whether or not he remembered the time correctly on when he heard the gunshot. And that was a damning time based on the cell phone data that showed Gary was there. Now, had he said it was between 9 and 10 and Gary arrived back on property at 10:32, okay, then that would have been, I'd call that witness all day. But I don't understand why they still felt like, let's call this witness at this point, who now basically just fills in the gap. I mean, to me, it was a situation where I think maybe they didn't think the jury would catch it, or maybe I don't know.
Maybe they thought there wasn't enough.
But it turns out that's what it turns out. That's what the jury. When the jury says that, and they went through the timeline. What clicked with that juror back there, who, remember, had spent at this point over a month of considering the evidence, is relying on her memory, and everybody's convinced, and everybody wants to go home. The judge has made it clear, you're not leaving anytime soon. You guys are going to keep deliberating. And that juror's back there, and they say, okay, let's lay this out for you. Let's walk through the timeline one more time. And then they walked her through the timeline, and I think they probably said, we have a witness who says she heard a gunshot. Who else was on the property at that time? Oh, yeah, you're right. All right. So she's not charged with cleaning this up. I mean, she is, but does it matter? Does it matter if Scott helped her burn it up? We're not here trying Scott. All we're here for is Melody Farris. So at this point, we have a gunshot at between 9 and 10. He says it was probably a little later. We have Gary arriving at 9:32. We have cell phone data that we know Scott, by witnesses, is not on property. We know at that time it was Melody and Gary on property. So what are we debating here, guys? And at that point, that's why that juror felt like, they said, oh, okay. And all the other doubts just went away, at least in that moment in the jury room. And they said, conviction down 5. And
she even admitted that there was doubt. And she basically said, well, it came down to, if it wasn't her,
except that when you just look at how I just laid it out to you, is there doubt? If you take at fact, which the jury is the trier of fact and determines what's fact and what's not. If they decide that they believe that witness was credible, and he says there was a gunshot between 9 and 10, you might get into, well, how do they know it was the Farris residence? And that's a reasonable doubt. But you say, no, we're going to go ahead and hold as fact that this man died. A gunshot happened between 9 and 10. The CPAP evidence, we're not going to put any credibility with that, although it could be credible, but it might not be credible. But we just don't know. But what we do have is a gunshot that says between 9 and 10 a gunshot went off. We know Gary Farris arrives at 9:32. They weren't there to determine, like him getting on the burn pile, since they were not alleging that the burn pile, that was important. The state was not saying the burn pile was how he died. They were saying he was shot, and then the burn pile was used to dispose of him.
But the shot wasn't what unalived him.
Well, we don't know that. We know one of the shots.
Isn't that what the medical examiner said? It was superficial. It didn't
just
penetrate.
That shot.
Oh, there could have been another.
Well, then we know there were at least 2, right? Because there was a bullet found in the house.
That's why.
And there could have been 3. There could have been 4. There could have been 5. I mean, what we know is there was a gun missing. And then, of course, you put in all the other stuff. Say, well, how'd she get a gun? Well, MJ said she had a gun. So everything was there for the jury there at that point. And here's the thing that's inexplicable. The witness, I believe, that would have been used in that jury room to eliminate any and all doubt based on what that juror said was put on by the defense.
But how many gunshots did they hear?
Well, 1. Or, I don't know. I think he said 1. But again, it doesn't, again, in their world, this guy is just hearing a gunshot. That's what's before them. And to that jury at that moment, remember, all the jury determines. So, like, this is
the weight of the evidence.
Weight of the evidence. And remember, a lot of people don't realize this. They think of evidence as like something physical, like this, my phone here, right? This is physical evidence. But testimony is evidence. You don't need any physical evidence at all.
No.
If they believe a witness beyond a reasonable doubt proves that the defendant did it, it's done. And in this case, once they looked at it and they said, okay, then you have Rusty's statement. Well, we don't know
if the 3 children against her as well.
You have the 3 children. I mean, once they determine the weight of that witness that comes in, and that witness was brought in by the defense, okay, and they say that's when it happened. No one else could have been on property. We know she shot him. Nothing else matters past that point because they're only there to determine, did she cause his death? And now there is a determination. Was it an accident? Was it this? Was it that? But the defense wasn't alleging it was an accident. The defense wasn't putting up a defense that says it was because she was battling domestic abuse. It was, she didn't do this at all. So once the jury says, well, we believe she did, and we believe she did based on the fact that we have an eyewitness or ear witness to a gunshot. She's at the scene. From the judge, that's called circumstantial evidence that you can say, like, you're out there, you see the footprints in the snow. You didn't see it snow. You see that there's snow on the trees. You can pretty much say it snowed last night. And when you went to bed, there was no snow. So overnight while you were sleeping, it snowed. And that's enough to be in a court of law to be proof beyond a reasonable doubt if the jury finds and believes. Now, could somebody come in and a dump truck come in and dumped all? But is that reasonable? No, not at all. Because you look around and you see snow as far as the eye can go. But it's possible, but it's not a reasonable doubt. Yeah. And in this case, it's the same concept of, is it possible that, an elf from the North Pole came on and shot Gary and she had no idea? Of course it's possible. Is it possible that some person was driving by and there was a drive-by shooting and, he got hit by a stray hunting bullet? Of course. But it's not reasonable based on the evidence and circumstances because the jury accepted that they heard a gunshot. And that's what so from the jury's perspective, and that's why the defense attorneys are like, sitting there, they didn't even touch that witness. Because again, it's inexplicable that they even put that witness on the stand because that witness was not going to be called because the state had already closed its case. And the state's rebuttal case is only in rebuttal to what the defense would present. So at that moment, that witness was never coming near the witness stand. And they put that witness on the stand who says he heard a gunshot that night. When I heard that, I was like, what are you doing? Now, there were still ways to argue against it. And it was still possible that the jury would say, I don't believe that guy at all. And it gets tossed away to the side. But again, when you're in a jury room like that and the jury's looking and they say, we know he's on property during the time the gunshots heard. Yep. There's only two people and everything else doesn't matter. The timing of the fire, the expert of the fire. And that's what somebody probably sat there and explained and said, this is all we're here to determine, guys. The fire expert, all the other crap, we don't need to know any of it. So really, if the state were to go back, the state could have literally put on a case that said we have an ear witness. We have
why bring all the lovers in?
Well, because again,
they were discredit them.
Well, because in their case in chief, they didn't call that person. They did not call. Clearly, they didn't think that guy was very credible. I mean, in terms of what he was hearing, and the defense would have said it could have been a firework, or it could have been this, or it could have been that. But at the end of the day, when it all came together, that's what the jury laid their hat on, and that's disturbing. When the defense team is the one that caused their client to get convicted because of their own incompetence of calling a witness that they should have never called. I mean, I don't know why that witness made it through the vetting process because that stupid comment that he made about, I can't wait till my parents are gone. The weight of that versus I happened to be at my girlfriend's house, which was right around the corner, and I heard a gunshot on the night of the 3rd between 9 and 10. When the state had put on no evidence to prove when this happened, and the defense puts that witness on, it's inexplicable. I mean, that could be something that later on you would argue ineffective assistance of counsel. Yep. Now they might counter that and say, well, that's trial strategy. They saw the strategy was there because they felt the weight of the testimony regarding his feelings about his parents outweighed this alleged ear witness testimony that they felt, but the problem is they already had this was not like they put in rebuttal to that, the cell phone analyst testimony. So it's
the strategy was pretty much third party culprit. Is that right?
Well, and the third party being Scott. So the idea here was that Scott has that, and the defense was, I think, blinded by their own knowledge that couldn't come to the jury. In other words, they were strongly convinced that Scott was guilty. And you heard the defense attorney say, I cross-examined him based on the failed polygraph test and questions. So they were like, we're going to go and and make Scott a bad guy. And they were so blinded by making Scott a bad guy that they put a witness on that in their mind was like, this jury is going to be so focused on Scott that they're not going to worry about the gunshots. But it turns out, guess what? They none of that mattered to the jury, because to them it was like, well, maybe Scott was a bad son-in-law, was a bad son. Maybe
But he's not on trial.
Right. And maybe he even helped burn his dad up.
Mm-hmm.
But it appears the only person that was available to kill Gary was Melody. And that's based on the defense's own witness.
Yep.
They put the witness on, coupled with the other stuff that came in. And this is a situation where, like I said, I remember my dad being involved in a case that he was trying, his law firm was trying, and I was there working as a paralegal, and or sort of as I was in high school, so I wasn't really being paralegal as much as I was just like a what's the term I'm looking for? No, well, it was a researcher, but it was paralegal wasn't the right term. It's they're hired intern. I was interning at the law firm, and basically, I was in charge of taking care of the expert witnesses. And the witness that I had, her name was Jolie, and she was like a psychologist. It was a child mistreatment case, and essentially, I was responsible for like taking her around and traveling around and I would go into court and I was taking notes. And so we're sitting there, and my dad and I would go to dinner after court, and I went to, and then we'd go back to the office to go, strategize and prepare and talk about things. So we're sitting at dinner, and I said the defense that the state had rested, and the defense was going to be putting on a full-throated defense. So it was like 3 witnesses. There was Jolie that was coming on. That was one of them that was in town. There was 2 local people that were coming into town. They were going to possibly have the defendant testify and say he didn't do all of this to his granddaughter. And so we're sitting there at dinner, and I said, Dad, I'll tell you what. I said, I'm listening to this case. I said, my knowledge of the laws here is that, in a case like this, they've got to prove specifically when this happened, where this happened, how this happened. I said, if you guys go put on these witnesses, my big concern is you're going to fill in those gaps, because right now as a juror, right, I wouldn't be able to answer those questions based on what the state put on. I said, I think the state is waiting for you guys to put on your case.
Yeah. Yep.
And then they're going to respond, and then this guy's going to get convicted.
Yep.
And he had it was 20 some counts of doing some nasty things to his granddaughter. And he was like, what? And I said, yeah. So he said, we were at a steakhouse eating, and he said, holy cow. So you're thinking rest the case? I said, that's what I would do if I was trying this case. Of course, I'm a high school kid. I followed, cases and been around his cases my whole life. I said, but I mean, based on my perception, the elements of this crime can't be met.
Yep.
Holy cow. So he gets on the phone. We're coming back. So we got our meal to go. He takes me back. He says, Stevie, come in there. I want you to tell everyone what you just told me. So I come in and I do it. They rest the case. Jury goes back 2 hours. No defense, 2 hours, not guilty. All charges. And in that case, again, my dad, everyone that was involved in the case, I was just involved in the case only because it was a summertime thing, and I'm there, and I was just working to.
Yeah, but you saw it through.
But I was coming in as a juror looking at it like I'm trying to figure this out from a juror's perspective. And right now, I can't figure it out. I don't know. I don't know if it happened at the cabin. Did they say it happened at the cabin? Did they say it happened in the basement? Where did they say? But I mean, as a juror, I'm not going to convict somebody when I don't even know where. But had they put on this defense, right, he would have testified.
Would have answered the questions.
All those questions would have been answered, and the state was pretty confident the defense was going to put a defense on. So when they rested the case, boom. And in this case, the same thing happens. The defense comes in. They're all very close in this, and they don't think about themselves that, well, we have the cell phone evidence that now if I put this witness on, he's going to say this happened between now. And now with that cell phone evidence that just came in, that again, they were not aware of until the trial started. So they probably were not really giving it the same processing that they would have if this would have been to them 3 years ago, that they might have said, you know what, we're eliminating that witness. That guy's already been called. He's already coming in. They're focused on Scott. They're not looking at that little nuance. And then sure enough, it comes out that he heard that gunshot, and then it's like, oh wow. And I remember when that came through, I was like, why did they call this guy? Like, this was a defense witness. What the heck? And turns out, guess what? That witness ended up destroying.
One of the other things that I found that that juror mentioned was that her demeanour came across as very cold, and she was judged upon that. Do you think perhaps she should have taken the stand in her own
Absolutely not.
defence?
Not in a
No?
case like that. Well, because again, once you take the stand, see, this is the thing that everybody's got to understand. When you take, like, again, a trial is not about the defendant as much as, in other words, it's obviously about the defendant because she'll be found guilty, but meaning what goes on in the trial.
Mm-hmm.
It is about the state's ability to prove the defendant is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. When the defendant takes the stand, they become the focus. So now it's, do you believe her or not?
So the burden shifts.
And it inadvertently shifts. Now, in some cases, the evidence might be so strong, or she might bring to the table evidence that needs to come in, and it gives the ability to bolster, that they can call other witnesses to bolster what she says, or she wants to present an alibi, or she wants to be able to tell a story. They think she's just a convincing, compelling person. Or in some cases, it's the battered spouse stuff that she has to testify. Yeah. There's no way around it, because the burden does shift over, and by preponderance of evidence, she's got to demonstrate something. So in those cases, she has to, or she can just say, well, I'm going to rely on proof beyond a reasonable doubt. I'm in the state's burden to prove me guilty. But when that happens in a case like this, she starts filling in all the gaps. When that happens, she's got to explain away these phone calls. She's got to explain away what she was doing. She's got to explain away, well, what was happening on the property at this time and at this time and at this time. And, unfortunately, I think it was it kind of probably did in a way work against her, because I'm sure the jury couldn't help but wonder, well, why in the world isn't she wanting to get up on the stand and declare, out in the mountain, I'm innocent? But at the same point, the judge did instruct them not to hold it against her, although clearly that juror did, right? I mean, the juror says she did in that when you listen to the jury interview. But jurors are humans, right?
But she didn't deny it, so she must have done it, pretty much.
Well, pretty right. And the thing was, but at the same point too, I think that the other issue that you had too was the amount of statements she gave the police. She was locked into a story. So there's also the idea too, from a defense attorney's head, if you're stuck with that story, you don't put the defendant on the stand and say, I'm going to tell you a completely different story. Mm-hmm. You just say, well, fine. Well, she's already testified to the jury. And she did. I mean, they played, what was it? I think it was almost 3 days worth of statements. So then the defense comes on and says, we're going to take up your time and take another 2 days out of your time of a month-long trial just for her to tell you the same story she just told the police. So her story already stood. Not to mention that her testifying opens up evidence that might have not been, which we wouldn't know about as jurors, because we shouldn't. So there was probably things that they kept out in pretrial that was like, if she chooses to testify, it's coming in.
There was a lot of stuff about Gary, apparently, and his behaviour and how they were actually working together as a team with regards to the children and the finances and stuff that didn't come in.
But remember, there's going to be, that opens up the state to be able to bring other stuff in when she makes that allegation, which may or may not be favorable, because then it's going to open up they're going to get to rebut that. So now there's going to be things the kids might not have been allowed to testify about that now they're going to go. And now you're going to have a full out trial on the relationship of Melody and Gary in that regard. Did she or didn't she? Things she might have done, things she might have said, things that the state may have been forced to keep out, but now if she testifies, it's coming in. So from a strategy perspective, I think it was the right move in a case like this, especially with such an unfavorable defendant. I think it was the right move. But I think, like, if you look at this case and you remove that witness, the alarm witness, and you take out that, the jury no longer has a timeline they can hang their hat on that says this is when all this happened.
So the cell phone stuff goes out, the fire goes, the whole lot.
Well, the cell phone stuff is there, but it doesn't have any meaning.
Yes.
to say it bolsters when this happened.
Mm-hmm.
Because at that point, all you have is Gary's CPAP, which now the defense can make a full-throated argument to say that CPAP evidence. Again, one of the things is he was in the hospital for 3 days. There was no evidence to say that CPAP was at the hospital with him. If it wasn't, then we have this data, which is not certified by the CPAP manufacturer, saying that he never missed a CPAP thing. So if he never missed a CPAP thing, could this thing have been off by a couple days? Could it have been not calibrated right? Did this thing process the data correctly? And there's no way to know that because they didn't use something that was certified by the manufacturer, which, as the judge said, well, so it could have been accurate or it might not be accurate. We're not going to know, right? Because you chose to do it this way. So the CPAP stuff, to me, at that point, as a juror, it's dismissed as saying it's like, now, that's me. But a juror could come in and say, listen, I understand that, but I'm going to put weight on it because he did say that this was certified, this was accurate, and it was, something that was used by data analysts like himself. I'm comfortable with it. I'm going to say that, okay, he clearly wasn't on the CPAP. Once that juror makes that finding in their mind, that's a fact, because they are the only finder and true trier of fact. And that's what we have to, that's a hard thing for people to understand too when they're analyzing, because it's like the jury gets to determine the facts in the jury room at that time. Now, we all might think it's different facts. We saw every out of court motion. We're aware of the polygraphs. We're aware of all this. So we are no longer qualified as a juror to analyze the case that went before that jury, because we were now subject to all of this outside information. And that disqualifies now us as an actual juror in the case, because we've been tainted. So although I can sit here and say this is my opinion, that is an opinion that is now tainted by a lot of outside information. So if you really want to be a juror in a case when you're watching this at home, and really put yourself in the mind of a juror, when the jury is out of the room, you should just turn the trial off and then go use the restroom, go get yourself a snack, and wait until you come back. And when you see that they're back, restart the trial from that point and keep watching it. And then you're going to get the full vision of what that jury's got. And then you have to be thinking of it too. If it's a state that doesn't allow for notes, then don't take notes at home. I saw someone in the comments say there should be a timeline. Well, here's the thing. No, they don't want that. They don't want you to have timeline. They don't want you to have something written down, because in a courtroom is a unique place. And it's a place that you come and these people come and testify, and really
it's like a stage, isn't it? Like a play.
It's a place people are analyzed. When you're on that witness stand, and even us doing it, watching it through our computers at home or our TV or our cell phone, we're not doing it justice. If you go to a real courtroom and you're sitting there watching, and if you sat on a juror, those of you who sat on a juror, it's a completely different scenario when you're sitting there. There's a reason why in the Karen Reed case, the defense was making such a big deal about jurors having a backside view of a witness, because the jury is there to watch that witness. They are told every nuance, everything, the body language, everything. You are determining, is that person telling you the truth or not? And you can take all of it, some of it, little of it, one piece of it, whatever you determine the fact is, you can take it, and that becomes a fact. And that becomes your fact. And that's why the defense can argue to you, the state can argue to you. They're going to tell you how they want you to view this case and what came in. But when you go back in that jury room, you're there. And what they've found, and this comes from a body of evidence of experts who have looked at how does the human mind work. When you start writing things down, you are deliberating. In essence, you're deliberating to yourself, but you're doing a form of deliberation because you're writing stuff down and you're drawing a conclusion. They don't want you drawing a conclusion or deliberating on this. In a long case like this, it's like, that jury on the way home to themselves had to be thinking about the case. I mean, by the admission of the defense attorneys, they said some of these jurors were having nightmares about the case. They were having nightmares about getting it wrong. They were dreaming about the case. So they were deliberating and drawing conclusions. And then, of course, when you come together, it becomes a whole nother experience once you start talking about it with others. But that's why they don't want you talking about it. They don't want you talking about it among yourselves, because at that point, they want you to really be able to, they really want you to just bring your sense of what's happening in that courtroom, not conclusions or things you've written. That's why one of the reasons why I saw Mike Skidmore saying he's surprised.
Yeah, that's true. They didn't watch the suspect; they watched the witnesses.
Yep. I watched Body Language and Melody and all of the witnesses. Well, the jury, rest assured, the jury was doing the same thing. They were watching her. They were watching the witnesses. But the thing is one of the reasons why they don't want the notes to be taken. Hold on one second, Joe.
Oh, the joys of having young kids.
No, he's playing music back there, dancing behind. But one of the things is the concern is that when somebody has taken notes, that the jury will put weight on the notes, which is then that one juror's perspective.
Yeah.
And by definition, when the jury is deliberating, it's supposed to be the weight of the impression of that juror of the evidence, and influenced only by what they experienced in the courtroom.
And they're going to write down what they think is important. So that's going to be
and
what
again,
they focus on.
Right, but this other juror hears something else, right? So they're like, this is what's important to me. And then this juror says, well, I have my notes here. And to me, it was this. And everyone, oh, you have notes. So everybody says, well, that's what's important then. And this person says, well, this is what I felt. Well, how do you compete with the person that took notes? So that's why in the case I was a juror in, we were allowed to bring our notes back. And I will tell you, the notes played a big part around that table as we were all talking. So
you all picked up on different things, or?
Oh yes, and then you had people wanting to speculate about, like, there were holes in the case, and it was like, well, it could have been this, and I said, well, hold on a second. Was that evidence that was no, but it could have been. I mean, that's how we. Right. I said, well, you can't do that. I mean, we can look at the evidence that's actually in this case, which we have to. That's what we have to draw our conclusions on. And in this case, it was whether it was self-defense or not. It was a scuffle, and that had happened, and a woman got hit with a clay pot, but this guy was diabetic with bad legs, and the allegations from the defense was this was an abusive sister, and it was an emotional situation over her mother, and allegedly this woman kicked the brother, knocking him to the ground, and then I guess she was like beating on him, and they're wrestling around, and he picked up a pot, hit her on the back of the head, to which then they're wrestling around. Neighbor comes in and says, I saw the guy on like top of her, and he said he was just trying to get up to get away, but he had bad legs, and she kicked him in his diabetic out of legs. Anyways, point of the matter was, the question before us was do we believe he was trying to kill her with shards from the pot? And we said no. We convicted him of like a lesser form of assault, because it was like, I don't think, based on what was testified, and the defendant testified, and the sister testified, and based on what the evidence was, there was a lot of blood, but that was because, she got like a superficial wound that just bled a lot, Yep. So the crime scene looked pretty gruesome. But at the end, we went with a lesser form. But when people were there, it was like all this speculation. Well, he could have done this, and it could have happened with this, and it was like, no,
didn't happen if there's no evidence.
And they didn't bring a blood spatter expert in. They didn't bring in all this stuff. We don't have anything to tell us that that's evidence, that's how to interpret the blood. I mean, We are not experts. What we have here is the testimony of the brother and the testimony of the sister. And we have to analyze that. And what we're given here is the sister says, we get to look at the motivations of the person. And this was a family dispute. And the sister was upset with the brother, because she thought the brother was trying to get the mom to give over money. And the sister and the brother was upset with the sister because he didn't feel like she was really there doing money for the mom. And next thing you know, they come in there and their sister shows up and there's a dispute, and allegedly she kicks him out of anger in his leg, causing him to fall. And then a scuffle breaks out and they just lose it, you know. So it seemed to me like this was not an intent to kill his sister. That was the other issue. Is I don't think he's intending to kill his sister. This is literally the equivalent. If they were 6 and 7 years old, they'd each be in timeout, you know. But this is what happens when
Get your room.
this is what happens when adult siblings, you know, lash out, and then somebody grabs a pot because this guy's feeling like he's getting, you know, and next thing you know, it breaks out. And you know, it turned out what we convicted him of was only a year penalty in jail, and he'd served 3 years waiting for trial. So he walked out of court that day. And the judge was none too happy about the case because the lady was a respected principal in the community. So so the neighbor 1 mile away heard at least 2 gunshots between 9 and 10 p.m. I think the neighbor, well, regardless, the neighbor heard, we don't get to assume that there was anything else because there was the problem, Mike's getting more is there was no evidence that gunshots were ever fired in that house. That was the problem. That's what was problematic about the bullet being found. There were no other gunshot holes in the ceiling or in the wall. There was no blood splatter around, and they actually blue starred that area, and that was a problem.
And a lot of that furniture was like linen.
So we'd have to assume that the gunshots would have happened outside in this instance. But then you get to the point of why did the bullet end up inside? In my opinion,
did it have DNA on it? That one inside?
Yes, it had skin DNA from Gary, but it was a very minute trace amount. Which my belief on that probably is, I mean, if we're looking at a probable situation, okay, of what occurred here.
Yeah, what's your theory?
The most probable theory that probably comes in is that she shoots him. You know, she shoots him outside. You know, if we're going to take that witness as fact, that she would. Gary probably got home, somehow ends up outside. Maybe it's Ted, maybe it's, you know, whatever. But we know he was going to go burn a burn pile, and she whatever happens, and she shoots him, right? And then she calls Scott, and Scott comes home, and Scott says, "Okay, I'll handle this." And my opinion is the burn pile was never burning on the 3rd because there was no evidence that it burned on the 3rd. I think that they went about their business trying to figure some stuff out, and then I think that Scott got home from that party and started the burn pile. The granddaughters were up at the house, you know. They're not great witnesses, but we know that burn pile had been burning the night of the 4th because the neighbors said it was burning. The expert witness said it was burning. Scott failed a polygraph, meaning he was involved to some degree, which tells me that he did this. Now, what I think happens is the way as I think Scott decides with Chris, as I think Chris was aware of what happened. I think he says, "Oh my God, Mom happened," or maybe Gary had a spell and whatever, but Chris becomes aware. Scott and they turn on Mom, and I think one of the things that the anthropologist said was strange was a piece of rib was out of place. Didn't have the bullet in it, but it was out of place. It was like down out of, and they said could that have been from animals? I think he went and got the bullet out and decided I'm going to go put this inside the house. And then that's why he's talking, because again, it's absolutely, completely 100%. We know he's talking to the police, telling them about
that bullet was
telling them about a weapon, and that was meant to link her to that.
Yeah,
I mean, these are not geniuses that are able to, like, you know, settle it up. So I think that, you know, I think she thinks that Scott's helping her, and in her mind, like, that he's not going to turn on her. But I think he's setting up the motion for the police to suspect her. And, you know, we know that Scott's spending on his credit card. We know that Melody's spending on a credit card. We know she has knowledge, which tells me she had to have knowledge that he died, you know, because she's spending on a credit card she shouldn't have had access to at Walmart.
To his wallet.
So I think that that's what ends up happening here, to some degree. But the problem is, I don't know when he was shot, but if we're going to take that guy's testimony at face value, which came out right afterwards, which says a gunshot of some sort. Now, here's the thing. This is a rural Georgia farm area, right? I mean, gunshots are not unheard of in that area. So we don't know for certain it came from the Farris' house, except we know for certain that 2 days later he's found in a burn pile with bullets in him. So it's a pretty good assumption from that. We know that although the CPAP can't be trusted, the CPAP probably more likely than not was accurate. It's just we didn't have the data analyzed in a software program that we could do. So he probably was not alive after the 3rd, is what we could say. Except we do have him moving all over the property. So there's a part of me that thinks, could he have been alive? Because there was also testimony. If you listen back to her statements, she says there was times when Gary was a pyromaniac, and when he got upset,
well, it was the 4th of July.
Well, here's what I'm wondering, right? And that's one theory. Then there's the second theory that says, how could Melody be innocent, right? So if we discredit the gunshots and say that was an outlier, that was something that not related at all to this.
Yep.
Right? Now we move to say, okay, the CPAP, no Gary on the CPAP, right? Well, what if Gary was up all night burning the burn pile? Melody, now the problem is Melody doesn't say that she interacted with him, because we know Melody's phone and Gary's phone were in the same vicinity of that burn pile. Now, Melody clearly says she believed Gary was alive because she smelled cigarettes and all that stuff. But what if Gary's up working and doing all of that? But then we have the problem of, okay, the burn pile would have been started at night, which the fire expert says it couldn't have been. But it also could have been started. Now, she doesn't say it could have been started at night. She just says the body wasn't yet on the burn pile until about 1 o'clock. So what if that burn pile was burning and it was starting to burn out, and then after 1 o'clock, Gary comes in contact with whoever killed him, which could have been Scott. They have a confrontation. He gets shot. He ends up on the burn pile, and then it gets started again with the body on it, and ignites and burns through. Now, that would have required, now remember, Melody said that burn pile, he'd been collecting for that burn pile for 6 months. So then the question comes, well, where do you get all of the stuff needed to have a big fire like that? I mean, maybe it was all there, but again, when you look at the timeline, it's very likely that Gary was probably shot on the 3rd. I mean, when you take a look at that witness who had no reason to lie about it and told the police that, and was testifying on the police statement he gave the police, where he said it happened between 9 and 10. So, well, I think, Mike, you're discounting the fact that I think she knew she would have been the inheritor of all of that money. She would have had to give Scott none, because the way the estate would work, unless her and Gary die, the kids don't get anything. The kids are not entitled to a thing. The farm, the money, the life insurance policy would all go to Melody. But I don't think this was something that, listen.
Do you think that was motive, though?
I don't look, if she did this, okay, which she probably did, but if she did this, right, I don't think this was a situation where she planned it out. But I think, because if you look at it, one of the key pieces to get into her mind and where she was at that moment, which would have brought her to doing something extreme like this, was, remember, the day before, the evening before, she had flown into a rage and threw a plate. And she had done that apparently multiple times, but she'd done it. And that's when Gary said, yeah, I just ate. I guess we'll see if I start feeling bad soon.
Oh, that's right. There was accusations of poisoning too.
There was. But that plate got thrown, right? Which just says she was just fed up. And then you have all this stuff going on. And then remember who was just on site, what would have been a couple hours before, right? Right before Gary left to go to dinner. Chris was on site. Okay. So if
With
you're
the girls.
following the psychology of how this could have played out, Chris is on site. He leaves. Gary gets in the car, goes down to catch 22 and eats. When she comes back, she comes down and says, "So, did you talk to Chris about the canceling? Did you tell him you're going to cancel that?" And he says, "No, Melody, I'm not canceling it. It's for my grandkids." Well, exactly, Gary. When does this end? When does this end, Gary? When do we stop? Well, what do you mean? When
Pandering to
does it
these
end?
kids.
It ends whenever I want it to. You don't control me, and it just blows up. There's nobody there, and perhaps he's walking out to the burn pile because he leaves the house and says, in essence, "F you," and she's downstairs. And if that gun was in fact downstairs, she goes and grabs it out of the drawer, walks out, and he's walking up to the burn pile, and bam, shoots him. And at first he turned, she goes over, and we don't know if it came in. I think they said it would have come in. I don't think they could tell if it was back or front. But she ends up shooting him. Boom, boom, boom. Right? Now, we don't know what the story is she's going to tell Scott, right? She tells Scott the horses are out. Scott gets home. Now, Scott isn't wanting to tell on his mom and say, "Yeah, Mom told me that whatever." But I think that now he gets home, and we know there's phone calls between them. We know there's communication. And she pretty much tells him, probably, "Your dad attacked me, Scott, and I had to defend myself, and I shot him. What am I going to do?" And he's like, "Oh, my God, Mom." And he, being the Iraq War, being the solver of problems, says, "Mom, we're putting him on the burn pile. I mean, that's the best thing to do at this point. We're making it look like an accident. I don't want to see you go to prison, Mom." And then, it's also possible, too, one other thing that could have happened is just maybe she fired from inside the house as he's leaving the house, or whatever, and it back kicked and then got kicked over there to the couch. Or at the very last minute, probably what I'm thinking is this now goes, Scott agrees to do this, and then he starts having second thoughts. And then when he sees her down there with Amanda, who doesn't know what's going on, he begins to think that Mom might be trying to frame him. Of course, he doesn't trust the mom who just shot his dad. And he goes, "Oh, my God." So he immediately goes down to the burn pile, finds it, grabs a bullet out of it, calls the police, because remember, he wants to take over, goes and runs inside and drops that bullet down, and then immediately starts talking to the police, because at this point he can't say, "Listen, guys, I was trying to cover this up for my mom, and I saw her talking to my sister, and I freaked out." So he starts trying to direct them where they need to go. He's hoping they're going to find the bullet. He's hoping they're going to look closer. He's hoping he's going to give them the breadcrumbs to get back to Mom.
Was that gun actually ever proven to be the one that fired the bullet?
No.
And it was MJ's gun?
No, well, we don't know. I mean, the only thing, listen, the problem with, this whole thing was problematic. Scott started talking about finding a 38 caliber gun, okay, that was in the basement, right? And that was from the beginning. MJ was watching the trial, and the recovery addict is down there in the corner, and he's saying she had to have gotten the gun from MJ, because MJ, they never checked, according to Rusty, because she was watching Rusty's testimony. Well, Rusty, they never checked the guns.
How's that for true crime YouTubers, eh?
Well, that tells you right there that,
he's the reason I got onto this.
Oh, is it? Okay. Well, that tells you the power of, again, that tells you the power of
absolutely
true crime YouTubers on there, adding that extra perspective. Now, she's watching that, and she says, "Oh, and I guess it had been troubling her that, oh, wow, allegedly that she knew that there was a gun down there. She didn't know if it was a 38. She just knew there was like a 357 and another gun that might have looked like a 38. She ain't a gun person, but she was told that that's what it was by, I think, others in the family. And she says that gun's missing. So that had sat in her craw, but she hadn't said anything about it, because to her,
she planted easily too. Who found it?
Well, I think she believed. I think she believed in Melody's innocence, and it wasn't until, it didn't make sense to her to, at the time that she would do this until she finds out Rusty was in an affair, and that was confirmed. That was never confirmed to her until the trial.
No.
So then she was really angry, and then she's thinking to herself, this woman is
These
in an
two have pulled the
affair
wool over my eyes for years.
right. And then on top of that, this woman is implicating her own kids to try to get out of this. This is definitely a bad person. And at that point, I think it was like all the gloves came off, and it was decided.
Never mind all the stuff she did for her in the past.
That mattered not anymore, because to her it was like we're in a different place now. And as a result, she reaches out to the state, and then again, the defense, by not having her under subpoena, she wasn't subject to sequester. So if they would have had her on the witness list, even if they didn't call her, she's never going to be watching that trial. And if she was watching the trial, then she definitely would have been excluded as a witness. She would have never been called. So once again, a misstep by the defense in strategy, right, led to her watching the trial, then her being able to testify.
And put the pieces together.
And there it all was. And that's the thing. So, so to me, I think it was, a situation where, it was just, listen, the universe has a way of self-correcting and things like this. And I do not believe for a minute that this is an completely innocent woman sitting in jail. I think she had something to do with it. I think if not pulling the trigger in the end, we just don't know how it happened. But that's how these circumstances go. Like I said, people say, well, it seems impossible. You only had to get it right once, right? You only have to fire that gun one time, and one time the bullet goes in and it enters the exact same way it entered, and it caused someone to die.
All right. So how much influence then do you think because the jury's been out for 2.5 days now, and then the judge pretty much gives his version of the Allen charge. Do you think that pressured the jury at all to come back with a...
Oh, well, I figured that absolutely, yes. At that point, if it would have been like 6-6, then I think that jury goes on and deliberates more. But I think that if it was, which was what the judge, I think, was probably trying to do, which was, all right, it's 11-1. We've got one holdout. We let this holdout.
Would he know that, though?
Well, no, he wouldn't have known that. But I think that this apparently, according to the defense attorneys, this is typical. That is typical behavior of Cherokee County judges, that apparently they're going to do 2 or 3 tries. They're going to make the jury come back 2 or 3 times. And again, in Georgia, if you go in and look at Georgia case law on that issue, because I was looking at it and was like, I was a little concerned about how the judge did that. They said, we're not concerned with it because this was just the way this judge did it. And the Allen charge would have been given, but in this case, he just took the liberty to say, listen, this will have been a long trial. I'm sending you back. And he chose to not give the Allen charge at that moment. Now, some jurisdictions and some states are very clear. Like Vinnie Politan said, when a jury is sacred, and when they say they're deadlocked, you give the Allen charge.
Yeah.
They come back and either come back with a verdict or they don't. Had the Ty Tucker judge decided to handle it the way this judge did, who knows what the verdict would have been at the end, because they would have gone back there, because in my opinion, the judge said things in a way that the jury would have interpreted to say, we're never
leave until it's unanimous.
Can't leave until you get a verdict. So it was going to require, what the judge was setting up is he wanted the jury to push back and say, listen, judge, we've tried. Because what the judge was doing there was he was testing the convictions of the jurors that were holding out. Was it strong? Is it strong? Are they willing to fight? Are they willing to come back out and say, I will stay here for the next year? I am not budging. Like, I am so strong in my convictions. Or are they wavering? But one of the problems is in the concept of reasonable doubt, and in the concept of we presume the defendant innocent. That kind of runs contrary to that.
Yep.
Because it's supposed to be that if a state's case on its face causes a jury to deadlock, then that's reasonable doubt.
Well,
at least
they
whatever
will.
jurors were there, and the case should be thrown out and be brought back. Mistrial should be declared, and they should be forced to come back and do it again, or consider getting rid of the case altogether. So,
I mean, they're in their third day of deliberation, and then they get this
but
so-called Allen
again, we're
charge.
down south in Georgia, and remember, precedents of prior case law rules the day, and the Georgia Supreme Court has been very lenient and given judges lots of leeway with that. So they felt like it was that it was a they
There's
felt like
another
it
name
was
for the Allen charge in Boston, isn't there? What did Bev Canoni?
Yeah, there is. I think you're right. I remember in that case they gave
the
it.
name of it.
Yeah.
It's a completely different name, but similar.
But imagine if Bev would have done that with the Karen Reed case.
God.
Who knows what would have happened? That'll be another case that's coming up again in January on that one.
I don't understand why they're retrying. There's got to be something more to it. There has to
Well,
be.
Again, they're retrying it, Jody, because the state. I mean, listen, the state doesn't have a choice but to retry that case, because if they don't retry that case, they've got that lead investigator is being charged with misconduct. They've got framing charges that they're alleged to have framed Karen Reed. The defense has made allegations that they planted pieces of the taillight. If they were to drop, if they drop that case, they're admitting that that's true. So when the defense takes a defense like that, you have no choice but to have a jury come back and say not guilty, which doesn't mean that any of that happened. It just means there's doubt about the case, which the state can live with, or guilty. And then that exonerates all the investigators, because now the jury says we don't buy any of that and she's guilty. But there is no dropping the case. She pleads out to some charge. Maybe she pleads no contest and takes a plea and says, yeah, to some level she was guilty with doing something with her vehicle that night. But there is no dropping the case. You can't drop the case, because they would have opened them up to lawsuits. I mean, Karen Reed's defense attorneys would be suing the pants off them, because it would be an admission that, yes, this is what happened.
So did you see the appeal they did with the?
I did not watch that, because I know that has to do with whether or not they should have acquitted her on the second degree charge, correct?
And it was to do with a double jeopardy as well, I think.
Well, whether that attaches to the second degree charge, because the jury is saying that they acquitted her of that, so she should only be being tried on the manslaughter at this point, not the higher level, in which Bev Canone disagreed with. So I did not. I need to go back and watch it. I had not.
Oh, you would find that interesting, I reckon.
Oh, I'm sure it's very interesting, because it's going to be a landmark situation in terms of dealing with a jury who determining
Weinstein's argument against.
Well, because it was never a verdict on that was never published. But jurors are saying a verdict was reached. And it's the idea of saying, again, erring on the side of the presumption of innocence, which is what our justice system is geared on. If you find out that a jury unanimously acquitted someone of these charges, and if they had reached a verdict on that, then the court should, by definition, because of the way it's structured, of our justice system is structured, and because of the presumption of innocence, they should go forward with recognizing that verdict and take that off the table. Double jeopardy attached.
The jury.
Well, I think it was suspicious the way they did all that, because she didn't poll the jury, but also recognize that her attorneys didn't ask for the jury to be polled either. So, there was failures on both sides. She sort of
read the note. They didn't read it. She read it out to them in court and immediately declared the mistrial without consulting anybody.
Right, but let me tell you, if those defense attorneys would have been screaming, "We need the jury poll, Your Honor, we need to approach."
True.
I mean, listen, they didn't do that. They just let it go, but they maybe strategically didn't do it because they probably, in their own sense, might not have wanted to know, because they wouldn't have wanted it to be public that it was 11-1 guilty.
Okay.
So they may have thought in their own mind, and then they figured out. But that's why you always do it, right? I mean, polling the jury is something you should always do. And in a case like that, my dad had a similar case to this scenario that he was involved with, and that the jury never got pulled, but he later found out in interviews with the jury that a similar situation had occurred. Now, they did not go back and acquit the person, and a plea was worked out eventually because it was used as negotiations with the prosecutor. And they ended up doing a plea to involuntary manslaughter, which in West Virginia was like a year, and the guy served like 6 months in jail, and then he was out. But it's a lesson that you got to do that. You've got to poll the jury, because sometimes the jurors back there don't know what they've done. They don't understand that. Yeah, we already reached a verdict on that. But when you have multiple levels, you don't just let the jury walk out. But in that case, that's what they found out when they talked to the jurors. Yeah, we'd already gotten down. We were hung on manslaughter, not on second degree in this case. And it was like, what?
And the verdict form was very confusing too. Like
it was.
It was all included on the one sheet. There wasn't one verdict form for each charge.
Yep, it was. It was very confusing.
So bizarre.
And so Marmalade says, let's see here. She says, didn't you all see how they spread Melody's prison photo? Her face looking funny. Oh yeah. Yep, I saw that. They got that out. Well, they always get those things out fast because that's like a victory photo, where it's like, oh, there it is. But.
So what do you think the likely sentence?
Oh, she's gonna get life without parole. She'll probably get life without parole. I mean, listen, what scenario do you think the judge is going to go? I'm going to let this person out who shot her husband and burned him up on a burn pile. I mean, that's life without parole.
I should clip that face.
She's lucky she didn't get the death penalty, for something like that.
There was 12 jurors, wasn't there?
Yes, there was 12. Yeah. Well, Florida's the only one I know of that does the 6 deal, which I think is a little. I've always thought that was a little strange that they allow that to happen because taking that 6 away is a huge. That's a huge. But they're allowed to do it. Look, Florida has so many
unto itself.
wild things. It's a wild world unto itself. But then you've also got, I believe it's in Louisiana, where they only have to do 11-1. Like they can actually do 11 or 10-2. They're allowed to get convictions. Risk assessment official asked, did Melody take a polygraph test? I believe she did, although I did not hear her.
They all did, didn't they?
But I'm pretty certain she did and she passed. But then Scott failed.
Yes, yeah.
No, Mike Skidmore, there was only one polygraph test, okay? He failed the polygraph test, he lawyered up, and he never took another polygraph test again. Yep. So there was only one, but he failed it, and when he was being confronted with the failure, he lawyered up, and then after that, he never went back in for anything else with the police. But then the problem was figuring out where he fit in everything, because what they again, at the end of the day, if you believe this happened on the evening of the 3rd, they were believing Scott had an alibi. And that was, I think you could tell by the judge that he thought Scott was involved. But I think the state, they believe he's the burner and they believe she's the shooter. And I think, but I don't think they think they can prove that. And that's the problem. Now, I think part of letting him testify and get cross-examined like he did, I think that was to maybe consider down the road if they could make a case against Scott. But I think it's still far from happening. But I also think now, listen, rest assured this, if there is anything to tell, with Melody now facing the rest of her natural life in prison,
she's got nothing to lose.
She's got nothing to lose now to tell somebody. And on top of that, she would prevent Scott from, or any of the kids that might have been involved in this or had knowledge of this, from getting any of the money. But we'll find out.
You just never know what happens behind closed doors, do you? Like family dynamics and
you never do. You never do.
Just blows my mind. The way money can affect people is
money is the root of all evil. It truly is.
absolutely.
It drives people to do terrible things, and it
Yep.
makes it drives families apart and friends apart, and it's that's why it's just it's a very divisive thing. But that's just what it is. So yeah, but
Did you have any updates as we're talking to about Florida?
no
Nothing yet?
updates on that.
Yeah.
Nothing yet on that. There is, like I said, there is a major thing that's going to possibly happen, but I have not gotten enough information, a confirmation. Let's put it that way.
I tried, and so did Marmalade.
I have not gotten a confirmation enough yet that I can say anything.
All right.
Besides that, I think there's going to be a resolution to the Ty Tucker case on the 13th when he has his docket.
That's his next status hearing.
That is his next status hearing. I don't want to speak on what that resolution will be.
Mm-hmm.
And if it, because there's just a lot of unknowns, and there hasn't been ability to get complete confirmation of everything that's happening. But my understanding is that there's been work going on behind the scenes, and that on the 13th, now, as you know, the third DCA, which Ty does not know yet, to my knowledge,
He doesn't know.
He does not know they turned that motion down.
Oh,
well, because he doesn't. I mean, he might know now, but he doesn't have access to the internet. So when stuff goes up there, it hits us, and then it takes 2 or 3 days for that order to travel. In fact, he wasn't even getting the order.
Well, I don't think anyone else actually knows, because I haven't told anyone. So, do you want to touch on what we're talking about?
The writ of prohibition that Ty filed with the third DCA, the third District Court of Appeals, which was the writ of prohibition asking to stop the case and throw off Judge Morgan, has been denied.
Yeah.
So Judge Morgan will be staying on the case. He will not be kicked off the case unless he takes himself off the case, which does not appear to be happening.
So does that mean his application to have a change of venue is also denied?
No, the change of venue has not at all been, that was something that's coming later.
Okay.
He did not file that. The writ of prohibition dealt solely with what he said was the bias of the judge.
Yeah.
The problem is the state attorney's office responded saying that, yes, bias, simply disagreeing with the judge's ruling, it does not show bias, because obviously everybody would throw judges off. Then you can't do that.
He didn't have the case law and the evidence to back it up.
Well, but then he never responded to the case, to that response, because who knows? He might not have been aware of that response, or when he was, he might have been working on it, and then he's got to send it up. And the last time when he tried to send the writ in, it took literally a month and a half for them to get stuff. Yeah. So he may have already had it on the way, although he's working on other stuff that maybe he might not even worried about sending it in, because it may not even be necessary to do so. But regardless, once that deadline passed of his response, they then ruled, because the only thing on record was that, and Ty's motion wasn't really clear on what he was alleging was going on. And it's very specific, if you're going to ask a judge to be disqualified, that whatever happened, you have to raise within 20 days. The only thing he was raising was what he said occurred with the ruling. The way he was presenting it was, he was upset that the judge had ruled that the state, well, there's a way to do that. You can dispute that ruling. You could file a motion to dismiss saying your due process rights are being affected by this ruling, or the lack of this and lack of that. And then the court could look at that ruling and whether or not that fits within the law. But to say we're going to disqualify the judge because you don't like a ruling, they can't do that. This is also why you need an attorney who knows now how to properly go after these things. And in this case, I think Ty was hopeful that that this was going to be make them scared, but it really didn't.
No, it's just converting all the all the other inmates to pro se defendants.
Yeah, well, I mean that's the downside of having him in there for the state, which I think is it's a downside for the state, but it's a positive for him, because it makes the state want to work this thing out and get him the hell out of that jail.
With that $3.1 million bond, and the fact that he didn't have, a hearing when he was rearrested as part of his bias from the judge, or
that would not necessarily be. See, that would not be, you don't get the judge tossed off the case for that necessarily because the judge ruled on it. Now, what you would do is you would file a motion to, first of all, he could have responded to the bond and said, I'm entitled to bond because this judge did not do this. My due process rights got violated.
Excessive bond, like.
And then on top of that, you could file a motion to dismiss under the grounds that my due process rights, my right to confront, has been violated so badly that I cannot defend against this case because they locked me up. And this was their scheme. They locked me up.
Yep.
They gave me a big bond. They denied me paper and pencil. I ended up in a divorce. I can't hire counsel. I didn't get my indigency declared. This judge has said now he's denying me rulings. He illegally made me go through the state attorney who won't allow me access to discovery, and they boxed me out. And the Constitution clearly says I'm entitled to defend myself to these things. And the fact that they denied me these things, the fact they've locked me up without a hearing, they kept me from getting the arrest warrant and able to defend myself. It was all a scheme to deny my due process rights to try to get me locked up. And as a result, the only remedy is dismissal in this case because it's such extreme measures taken by this judge. Then they would file that motion and he'd get a chance to argue it. The problem is those legal arguments are if you're not a lawyer who's skilled in knowing what to do and how to react, but that's how I believe you would handle that. Again, I'm not a Florida lawyer. I'm not a lawyer at all. I'm just saying that's what I would think.
I've said that for a long time.
But that would be to me, that would be that's the correct, appropriate way that he should have handled this. And, it just was not, he didn't handle it that way. But listen, I think hopefully this thing gets resolved. I think it sounds to me like they're on the potential path of resolution, but we will learn more. I'm probably not going to be able to confirm anything before the hearing on the 13th.
Well, it normally takes them a couple of days to upload it online anyway, doesn't it? So,
well, listen, if it were to go down, I think it's going to be reported pretty quickly because it will update on there that basically what's going to update is the disposition of his case will get updated. So if something happens like that, it will update very quickly, and I'm pretty certain one of my sources of information will be notifying me immediately. And we will be able to go live right away because I know, Ty, is okay with me, but I don't want to talk about the situation until I understand it because I feel like if I put certain information out, people might judge it, and I don't want to do him a disservice until we understand fully everything that's happening. Because I just don't want people to be like, oh, he's doing this, and then it's like word will circulate around and say, oh, this is what he was doing, and I'm like, I don't want to be responsible for that because still at the end of the day, it might go before jury again. So I don't want to put any information out there that would potentially gain feed or traction or make people think, oh, I heard this, he was doing this. I don't.
Chinese whispers. By the time it gets back around, it's completely different.
Now, if Ty would have called me and said, I'm going on record with you, Steve, and I would like to do a phone call, I'd be more than happy to put him on and let him tell us what's going on. But I'm not going to go travel second, third, and fourth party information, except to say that there is some positive things going on. I was hoping to get some real confirmations of what was happening. Thank you, Marmalade. I appreciate that. It comes from, like I said, being around my dad's time as a attorney and consultant and talking with him, and like I said, I was around it all the time. And my dad was one of the greatest legal minds of all time, so I think there's kind of a sharp natural instincts about it. But also I've been schooled on it. I've watched it.
You've lived it and breathed it.
Lived it and breathed it. And like I said, if I helped my dad with his fight for when he was prosecuted for unlicensed practice of law, I was his paralegal essentially because I was helping him with it. We took that case, we tried it, and then we took it all the way up to the United States Supreme Court, which he got turned down. Took it to the West Virginia Supreme Court. It got, affirmed, but it was and I was doing that while I was working, but I went a different direction, mainly because I just think that to me it was I saw the destruction of trying to manage the law. Once I had a family or had a child, I felt like maybe I will, but I gotta make sure that I can be, but I can still be here. That's part of why I enjoy doing what I'm doing right now. I can still at least be around it and offer expertise and be a great juror and come in, but I am not a lawyer. I'm not a legal expert. I'm just here sharing my perspectives. So I don't give anyone legal advice.
Today, a friend of mine got issued a subpoena to go to court for it was a punch on they had 3 years ago. It finally caught up with them. And I'm like, show me your documents. Show me this. They haven't got this. It's this. He's like, Jody, this is Australia, not America. Yeah. Okay. Oh, well.
So Marmalade was wanting to know how they got the third-degree felony unaliving on Rhonda Jewell, and I think it's simple, Marmalade. That was a
Rhonda
verdict.
Jewell.
Yeah, Rhonda Jewell was the babysitter in Florida.
With the
so
car.
I mean, I think that's pretty. I think to me that was obviously they felt like they were making a compromise. So understand this: she's punishable. It's punishable by up to 15 years in prison, but she could get probation. It's a probationable offense. Third-degree felony unaliving is. Well, now Marmalade, that is true. Okay, it does have to happen in commission of a crime, but you have to remember the judge let it go to the jury, right? So the jury, I don't think really understood that. I think what the jury understood is she left the child in the car, and they could not probably determine 100% whether or not where her mindset was. But I think in their minds, it was she left the child in the car. That, under the way the jury's probably understanding it, that meets the felony, the predicate felony. But there is, if you noticed, there was interesting arguments during the judgment of acquittal argument, which was saying that it is in question whether or not the predicate felony for the felony third-degree unaliving, if you look at the statute of felony unaliving, which I was looking at, it does not include that charge. Now, the state's argument is that they would have excluded that charge by definition in the statute if they wanted it excluded. So again, this will be something that will be taken up on appeal to determine if
what state was it in?
It was in Florida. Well,
of course,
the crime appears to be forgetting the crime. That's exactly right. I mean, the question at hand with the jury at the end of the day is again, and this would be an argument on the appeal, is that the acquittal of the top charge, right, which the defense to that would be forgetting. That's the only way you get to it, right? So then you travel that down and say, well, then how did they convict her of this and this? Because the essential thing would be they could convict her of the aggravated manslaughter, but then you move down the line and you say, okay, then she's by definition guilty of the leaving the child in the car, right? And then the felony third-degree unaliving then comes into play of whether or not that's constitutional or not that was a predicate felony for that. But they could still convict her of it if the judge allows it to go before the jury, because the jury is not going to be determining matters of law. They're determining whether or not, if the judge determines that is a predicate felony and they determine that she committed it, then they can find her of that. So I think now what the jury has done, and this is why the judge is letting her out on bond, because I think you're going to find that even the judge may consider, even if he does a prison sentence, she may stay out on bond, provided that the surety person who's insuring the bond is okay with it. I think he might even let her out on a post conviction bond, because this is one of those cases where all she was convicted of was a crime that we're not even certain, whether or not it meets the standards for third degree unaliving.
So she left the child in the car, and the
Correct.
child passed,
Correct.
and she could walk on a bond.
Well, yeah, she got out on a $25,000 bond originally after a day of incarceration.
Did she get
She had to
convicted and found
determine.
guilty?
She got convicted. She did get convicted in. She got convicted in. Yeah, she did get convicted. But it was of third degree felony unaliving, and the underlying felony is the leaving a child in the car and resulting in death, which is a felony, and it's a third degree felony in the state of Florida. But the problem is in the statute, it doesn't exclude that as being a felony, a predicate felony, but it says third degree felony unaliving would normally deal with maybe a reckless situation with
Drunk
drugs,
or something.
drunk drivers, something like. It doesn't necessarily say that can't be used, but it doesn't state it in the statute. So now that becomes a issue for the Florida Court of Appeals to determine if.
So she's been charged with the wrong charge. Is that what you're saying?
No. It's whether or not it's the leaving the child in the car resulting in death. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to stand. It's whether or not that can then be used to say, because if you understand felony unaliving, it says that in commission of a felony, someone died.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So normally when that was thought up, that was meant to cover, like, say there's 30 people involved in a robbery, right? And one person shoots the guy. In the old days, 2 people would be charged with robbery. One person would be charged with the unaliving and the robbery.
Mm-hmm.
They thought of felony murder and said, well, if you're committing a robbery, even though your intent was never to murder, because remember, you got to have an intent to kill.
Like
even though your intent was not to kill, your intent was to rob this person. And it is such a dangerous crime that we're going to take that when the fella that shot somebody, their intent transfers down to you through the felony that you did. Mm-hmm. And now we're going to get you to conviction of murder because your intent would have been, it just happened that out of the 3, one of you was faced with that person and that guy shot it. So that guy's intent gets to transfer down, and they then allow you to be convicted of.
Like the treehouse situation.
Correct, in a sense. Yes. And essentially that's where, that's where it comes from. Now in Florida, they've taken it to extremes. They've made it first degree, second degree, third degree to cover all different, because in Florida, there's first degree, second degree, and third degree felonies. So now they've said, well, in that case, we're going to have first, second, and third degree unalivings, felony unalivings. That means if you commit a second degree felony that results in death, boom, you get second degree unaliving. Third degree felony. But the problem is, although it's a third degree felony, it is not a recognized, because there is a certain standard that needs to be
criteria
there,
that needs to be met.
Right, in these type of felony, in these type of things, because it's not just everything that you can just say, because normally it has to be, there's a idea that it's a dangerous act or something that that would have been, you would have been doing something or causing, you had an intent to do something. And in this case, leaving the person in the car, it's more of a reckless situation. Although, so with speeding, you're recklessly driving down the road and you kill somebody, they could get potentially, if they would charge you with felony reckless driving, then maybe that could transfer over to reckless unaliving, or, felony unaliving. It's a very convoluted situation but again, this is why the judge said, well, we're going to move forward with it. And I'm going to let the jury consider that. And I'm going to let them consider that is, because the state's argument was, if they didn't want it included, the statute would have specifically said this and this and this can't be included. Well, the thing was, Marmalade, you know, I think my understanding was I saw that they were offering her 30 years in prison now, which now she's only facing a maximum of 15. So she's in a better position now, at least. And then in Florida, now understand this.
It's at 85%, isn't it? Or
Well, this is a probationable offense, but I know I also had read, I remember in the Benefield case, that if you don't take a plea, although I think that was aggravated manslaughter, which is no longer on the table, but had she been convicted of aggravated manslaughter, if you don't take a plea on a manslaughter case and you get convicted of that offense, you get a minimum of 9.5. So she would have been remanded, definitely. But this judge
she
has
gets sentenced next month too.
So this judge has a leeway to give her probation. So, I mean, we'll see if he does. But well, with that though, Jody, I have, as you heard, my phones are going off. My sister's in town,
absolutely.
So I've got to wrap it up today. But it's been
no
great.
worries.
We've got we've still
Keep your
got
notifications on.
Yes, because I guess what is today? The 9th. So 10th
next
is
Wednesday's
Sunday.
the 13th.
Wednesday's the 13th. Yep. So we will.
We may have an impromptu.
Be waiting on that. Yep. And then of course we have the Louisma trial still going on. I don't know if you're covering that at all, but that one's out in Iowa. So I anticipate that'll go to the jury.
I've only just finished the Leilani Simon one with the toddler in the trash, but I was actually looking at the Chandler Holderson trial from a few years ago.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That sounds familiar, but I have not covered that one.
No, it's a few years ago where he unalived his parents.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. He was a college, or I think he was a college student. He was going to college and dropped out. And well, that I was thinking of that in the Farris case where they were saying, why would a kid kill his parents? And that had to do with money. And then he said they were up at like their mountain cabin or something, and
that's
then
right.
they never were. Yeah. It's that's a bad one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, well, I guess in 2 weeks we'll be back and we'll see what that comes. Maybe we'll be covering the Thai case, or maybe we'll have a special guest in Thai or something. So we will.
Well, that would be awesome.
We'll see how this plays out.
Stay tuned.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for being here, Steve. It's lovely to see you again.
Absolutely lovely to see you. Thank you for
give the kids and the wife a kiss.
Talking with it. Yes, I will.
Have a good rest of your weekend. Thank you all for joining us. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Now, where's the outro?